Okay, so we've talked about geography as a field of study, and I want to zoom in a little bit on physical geography versus other types. So geography covers a wide range of subjects, including the physical Earth and its landforms, its water, its climate, and so on. It can also cover human or cultural aspects such as population, languages, religion, and so on. And so in this course, we're really going to be focusing on this end of the scale, on the physical geography of the Earth. So let's define this a little bit. So physical geography focuses on processes and features that make up Earth's environments. And I want to pause on that for a second and discuss it. So processes are things that create the environment. So you may have a mountain range that's created by processes that have to do with volcanoes or plate tectonics or other things. You can have valleys that are created by erosion. And it's these processes, these things that happen that create the physical environment around us. Now, while I'm talking about this, I want to also illustrate what physical geography is not. Oftentimes when we learn about geography in school, we may focus things on things like what's the longest river, what's the highest mountain, and we're really not going to focus on those aspects. We're really going to be focusing on processes, the things that create the environments around us, rather than focusing on like what are the biggest or largest or this and that. That's not going to be our focus of the class. Now, the physical Earth is a big, complicated thing. So to help us understand it better, what we have to do is sort of divide and conquer and look at various aspects of the physical Earth. And in physical geography, we often lump those into four categories and what we call the major systems or the spheres. And those are the atmosphere, the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, and the biosphere. The book also discusses something called the cryosphere or ice, and that's really a subpart of the hydrosphere. So let's kind of look at those in a little bit more detail. On the one hand, we have the atmosphere, and that's the gases that surround the Earth. It has to do with the interaction of the sun and the Earth. All of Earth's weather is related to the atmosphere. We also have the lithosphere or the rock layer of the Earth. This is the processes that create the physical environment, the rock part of the environment of the Earth. We have the hydrosphere, which has to do with Earth's water. And that is going to overlap with a lot of the other systems as well, because living things need water. Water is part of the weather, and so on. But water is important enough that it gets its own topic here. And lastly, we'll be looking at living things on the Earth, or the biosphere. Bio like biology, so about living things. And, you know, we'll be looking at some of the interactions with one another, but when we look at how the book is organized, after we get done talking about the basics of geography, we'll be focusing on weather and climate, which is more related to the atmosphere. Then we'll be looking at living things and water, which is about the biosphere and the hydrosphere. And towards the end, we'll be talking about the lithosphere, or the physical rock part of the Earth, volcanoes, plate tectonics, and that sort of thing. And we'll also circle back to the hydrosphere again, because water is a big part of what we call erosion, or the reshaping of landscapes. So if we look at this illustration here, this is a figure that we'll look at later in the semester, looking at what we call ecology, or the relationship of living things and their non-living environment. So we have living things like a tree and grass and a rabbit and a fox. These are part of the biosphere, the living part of the Earth, but they don't survive. You know, they interact with each other. The fox eats the rabbit eats the grass, the tree shades out the grass. But all of these things also are dependent on their physical environment, the other spheres, like the atmosphere for gases. There's exchange of gases with the tree, the sunlight, how it interacts with the Earth. Also, the lithosphere, they live on the solid rock part of the Earth, which also provides minerals and nutrients for the living things as well. And then in between is water. Water flows from the atmosphere to the earth and is part of the, is required by these living things as well. So we're looking at a lot of interaction of various parts of the physical environment, and it helps to break down these by their components to help understand them one part at a time.